The Raiders have identified their next general manager. Now it's on to their next head coach. That plus more on Thursday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for January 23rd, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you're catching us wherever you find your favorite podcast or you're checking us out by way of the YouTube page. We do appreciate both. The show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your consistent support, Raider Nation, and because of the job that my man Ari does behind the scenes on the YouTube page, definitely making that thing go. If it wasn't for Ari, we wouldn't have the YouTube page, and we definitely appreciate him. You can shout him out as I shout him out. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. I'm on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254. And if you want to be a part of the show, your feedback is always welcome. 707-654-4693. That's a Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. As a matter of fact, plenty of feedback to get to on today's show. Your calls and texts. We'll close things out in segment number 3. We'll talk about the GM, talk about the potential head coaches, talk about the direction that Tom Brady and this organization is going for 2025 and beyond. All that is coming up in segment number 3. Some really good calls, some really good texts that I definitely want to make sure we get to. Segment number 2, we'll turn our attention to the potential head coach, who could be the head coach for the Raiders now that they've identified their GM. What direction will they go? There's plenty of guys that they've interviewed. There's obviously guys that they haven't interviewed that could still be in the mix, but if you're just looking at the guys that they've interviewed, we're going to definitely focus in on one of them, and that's Ron Rivera, who interviewed late last week. Him and Robert Saleh both interviewed, I believe, on Friday last week. So do a little bit of behind the scenes of what Ron Rivera could bring to the table as the Raiders' next head football coach if they decide to go in that direction. Sheena I caught up with her on Wednesday on my radio show. She does a fantastic job covering the Panthers, so she knows all things Ron Rivera. You'll hear from her in segment number 2 of today's show. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day, and it really all goes back to the new general manager of the Raiders, John Spytek. We'll get into that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. And I got to take you behind the scenes before I really jump into the John Spytek conversation. I really got to take you behind the scenes. On Wednesday early in the morning, I was sitting in on ESPN's show Greeny, sitting in for Greenberg, and as I've done many times, and that show lineup was going to change sooner rather than later, but sitting in on his show and found out the news about Liam Cohen, who is the current Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator, who was in line to get the Jacksonville Jaguars head coaching job. It looked like that was basically a foregone conclusion. He was going to be the guy. All of a sudden found out from Adam Schefter that he pulled his name out of the mix. He no longer wanted to be in play there in Jacksonville, and he was going to return to Tampa Bay, be the offensive coordinator, and get a contract extension on that to stick around. And I'll tell you, it was me and Hembo on the show on Wednesday, and Hembo was talking about Trevor Lawrence, and, man, it's so bad that Liam Cohen decided he didn't want to coach up Trevor Lawrence, and he'd rather go back to Tampa Bay and coach up Baker Mayfield. And I'm telling you, I kept going back and forth with him, and I kept telling him, it's not Trevor Lawrence. No, he has not lived up to being the guy that everyone expected him to be as of yet. And he's had different coaches try to get him there. And no, he hasn't lived up to that. I get that. I agree with that. It is not Trevor Lawrence that he turned down. It was the Jacksonville Jaguars organization and the fact that Trent Baalke was still in play as the GM of the Jaguars. So I'm going in on this. I'm saying Trent Baalke should have been fired. They moved on from Doug Peterson. They should have moved on from Baalke at the same time. Liam Cohen is a guy that if he had his way, John Spytek would have been the GM there in Jacksonville, and he could have taken that job. And I know Hembo wasn't trying to hear me, and that's okay. I get it. That's fine. But not too long after that, matter of fact, a little bit after the show got wrapped up, we found out, Adam Schefter tweeted out that there's a new leader in Las Vegas. Raiders are finalizing a deal to hire Buccaneers assistant GM John Spytek as their new general manager. So there it was. It was just that quick, right? I mean, again, John Spytek could have been in play in Jacksonville. I know Liam Cohen was interested in him being there in Jacksonville with them. The Jaguars decided not to move on from Baalke, and so then Cohen pulls his name out. And not too long after that, Trent Baalke is fired by Shad Khan in Jacksonville, which he should have done a long time ago. So it's a wild turn of events. It's wild the way that the whole timeline shook out. Jacksonville clearly dropped the ball as far as I'm concerned. Now, that's good for the Raiders because, I hope that Patrick Graham does get that job. He's going to interview for a second time, him and Robert Saleh, later on this week. So I'm hoping that Patrick Graham gets that job, not only for him because I think he's a good guy and he deserves a crack at it, but also the Raiders would get a draft pick. I know his contract expired, but it doesn't matter. They would get a draft pick. They would get, I believe, a third-round compensatory pick for Patrick Graham going to the Jacksonville Jaguars as their head coach. And so, again, like I said, I would be genuinely happy for Patrick Graham because I think he's a really good dude. But any way that the Raiders could benefit from that, I would take that as well. So with that being said, when John Spytek was announced as going to be the guy that's the Raiders GM, I thought immediately, and I tweeted this out, could this change Liam Cohen's thoughts on, deciding to stay in Tampa Bay as offensive coordinator? And many people hit me up and said, no, he just signed a contract extension. Yeah, that doesn't matter. The contract extension for an offensive coordinator doesn't matter. He's probably making about $4.5 million. What he would make as a head coach is probably like around 10. And Tampa Bay could not stop him from deciding to go on and be a head coach. And look, there's more likely he's not going to leave and be the head coach of the Raiders or anyone else this year. He's probably going to do the same thing Ben Johnson did, stay there in Tampa Bay, have another really good season, and then be the hottest name out there, similar to Ben Johnson. I wouldn't blame him for that. But I also wouldn't rule Liam Cohen out for the Raiders just yet because, again, now that John Spytek is in place, he is the guy that he wanted to be the GM in Jacksonville. I wouldn't rule it out 100%. Again, I don't want to give you false hope. I'm not trying to gas you up and try to, blow smoke up your backside, but I'm also not saying that it's 100% out of the question. But what is something that we do know for a fact is that John Spytek is going to be the general manager of the Silver and Black. So that's something that's exciting. Saw a lot of national media giving the Raiders love for the hire. And that doesn't happen very often, right? It doesn't happen very often that the Raiders get any national love. As a guy that's on ESPN National just about every day, I know that the Raiders don't get a ton of love. I'm actually glad to go on there and talk about the Raiders because I feel like I bring a different perspective, and I think that the Raiders need that. But guys like Booger McFarland tweeted this out. Earned. Can't wait to see what he does. One of the finest eyes of talent I've ever talked to. Now comes the biggest decisions of his career. Coach and quarterback. That's from Booger McFarland from ESPN. Also, this one from Greg Allman from Fox Sports, who covers Tampa Bay Buccaneers like a glove, covers the NFC South really well, has been covering the NFL for a very long time. He said, great hire. Spytek has been a central part of the Bucs being one of the NFL's most homegrown rosters. Great success in the draft, smart choices in free agency. He's been ready to run a team of his own for a few years now. That's from Greg Allman. I thought that was fantastic. I know Greg really well, so of course, you know me, I'm going to do my due diligence. And I know that we reached out, and I know we did our due diligence on John Spytek a week ago before he was in line to be the Raiders GM. But now that he is in place to be that guy, and the Raiders haven't announced him officially yet, they will sooner rather than later. I said, hey, I'm going to reach out to Greg, get him on my radio show, and get a little bit more detail. So here's a few minutes of the conversation I had with Greg Allman from my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Wednesday, talking about John Spytek. And we just started off, he responded to the question about, the John Spytek hire. What do you think about it?
Yeah, not surprised. I mean, this is one of those where, I think going back to, Bucs winning the Super Bowl in 2020, they've been really fortunate to kind of keep their front office together with the same kind of nucleus, going back 8-9 years here. So no, I was not surprised at all. Once the GM job came open, knowing that he and Brady had some success together, I think it's neat that, Brady, this is really his first, I don't know how much of his fingerprints are on this, but really his first big football hire with the Raiders. So it's neat to think that with all the history he has with the Patriots and all the connections he has from that, that he chooses somebody from Tampa and somebody that, was a big part of them winning a championship together just 4 years ago.
What does John do as far as his role in the draft, right? You mentioned in the tweet the NFL's most homegrown rosters, great success in the draft. Obviously, he was the assistant there. So how much input does he have in the drafts that Tampa Bay had?
Oh, a lot, I think. I mean, I think he's been Jason Light's right-hand man. I mean, they have the kind of the hierarchy they have here is they have two assistant GMs. Mike Greenberg, who just interviewed for the Jets job, is the other one, and Mike's probably more the salary cap contract negotiator. I think they both are heavily involved in these personnel decisions, but Spytek is more like Jason Light in terms of having a scout background, a front office background. No, I think he's very involved I think they've had great success. You go back to, Tristan Wirfs and Antoine Winfield. I think they've had good success, second-day draft picks of late. It's one of those where, even free agency, they've done pretty well. So I'll be interested to see, how quickly they can move on building a front office now. Obviously, the two biggest decisions a GM can make are coach and quarterback, and he's got them both to figure out here in a short amount of time.
Speaking of coach, we saw today Liam Cohen pull his name out of the Jacksonville Jaguars mix. I assume that a lot of that had to do with Trent Baalke being there and not John Spytek. From everything I understand, that's who he wanted to be the GM in Jacksonville. Is that something that you've been hearing as well?
Yeah, I don't know that specifically. I think that it definitely would help to have a GM that you're familiar with and a leadership that you've worked with. I don't know that was like a deal killer for him necessarily. But I was checking to see whether, Baalke being out of the equation would change things at all. And I don't think it does. I was told highly unlikely that he would do anything to change his mind or consider a second run, no matter who the GM is there in Jacksonville.
Anything on the front of maybe now that Spytek's in Las Vegas, maybe he could have some interest in the Raiders?
I don't know. I can't tell if that's a separate decision or not. I wonder if the Raiders would be hesitant to make another hire of a relatively young and inexperienced head coach.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of who Pierce was, and that didn't go well. Sometimes you tend to, as franchises, you see franchises kind of do the opposite of what they just did wrong. So I wouldn't write off anybody just because they're a young coach or an inexperienced coach. But I think if that didn't work out, it makes sense that you might follow that by hiring somebody with a little bit more experience, someone who's been a head coach, just so that's not a hurdle you have to clear 2 times in a row.
What would you think about the decision if they decided to bring in Pete Carroll, who obviously has got plenty of history and plenty of coaching experience in the league?
Yeah, it's neat to think about. I mean, it's the opposite extreme. Everybody wants to go young. Everybody wants to go 39 years old. On the way up, Pete's got, obviously as much experience as, since Belichick is in the equation, as much experience as anybody. Had such a run there in Seattle, consistent winning there. He's been out for a year, so he's kind of in that Vrabel category of somebody who's had a year to step back, would have no trouble building a great staff just from guys that he's had in the past. He's 72 years old, so there's something to be said for that. You're not getting a guy probably for a decade here, but if you have a guy that wants to make a run and see what he can do in 3-4 years, I think that the nice thing about that is that if you're in a division that right now has Andy Reid and Jim Harbaugh and Sean Payton, that gives you a little bit more of a fair shot, in bringing in somebody else that has Super Bowl to their credit, that has whatever it is, 200 wins in the NFL. I think you'd feel a little better about Vegas being up to par with the rest of the coaches in that division with somebody like Pete Carroll.
So there's Greg Allman right there talking about John Spytek. Just a few minutes of what he brings to the table, how he's been important to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their success. Obviously, he's got a history with not only Tom Brady, but he's got a history with many others. He's got a history with a guy like Todd Monken. They were in Tampa Bay together, so maybe he's going to look at Monken, who the Raiders have requested an interview, and it has not been confirmed yet. That's one direction. I mentioned Liam Cohen before the sound. Maybe that's a direction that they go in, or maybe they go in the direction of a seasoned veteran head coach. Because, again, remember, one of the hangups that Mark Davis had when he hired Antonio Pierce and didn't hire Champ Kelly to be the GM, he didn't want a rookie head coach and a rookie GM. So maybe he'd rather go in the direction of a seasoned veteran, a Steve Spagnuolo, a Pete Carroll, a Ron Rivera, a Robert Saleh. You'll hear about Ron Rivera coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. But you heard Greg Allman right there talking about, John Spytek, and also ending up with Pete Carroll and, how they go up against, how he would go up against the rest of the AFC West, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So coming up in segment number 2, as I mentioned, you'll hear about Ron Rivera. We'll talk about different coaches that could be in play, especially veteran coaches that could be in play. We'll do that next on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a great sponsor here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and that is Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. And who couldn't use better sleep? Even I could use a lot better sleep. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule could be a challenge. And that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this Locked On Raiders podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter the promo code SPACE80. It's the word space with the numbers 80. It's all one word to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code is SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code, all one word, space, the number 80, space 80. All right, Raider Nation, there we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Now that the Raiders know who their GM is, and I'm excited about the fact that they do know who their GM is, right? John Spytek is the guy. He's got skins on the wall. He's got a lot of respect around the league. People are fired up to see what he's going to do. His first tall task is going to be to find out who the next head coach is going to be. There's guys that he has connections with, like a Liam Cohen I talked about in segment number 1. There's guys like Todd Monken that he's got connections with. He doesn't necessarily have to go with the guy that he has connections with. He could go with the Steve Spagnuolo, who's still coaching with the Kansas City Chiefs as the defensive coordinator. A Pete Carroll, who I'm all in on. I think Pete Carroll would be a really good coach. Obviously, he's not going to be a 10-year, 12-year guy, but he can do a good 3, 4, 5 years with the Raiders. And, well, that'd be the most successful coach that the Raiders have had in a very long time. He can go with Robert Saleh, who a lot of people are giving a lot of credit. You heard about him on a Wednesday show, a little breakdown on what he brings to the table. And he can go with a guy like Ron Rivera, a guy who had success in Carolina, got him to Super Bowl 50, right? They lost Super Bowl 50 to Denver, but had a hell of a team there led by Cam Newton in his MVP year. And I really thought Cam Newton was going to take over the league after that. And when he didn't dive on that ball in the Super Bowl, it seems like everything went downhill from there. Obviously, he didn't last much longer in Carolina after that. They got new ownership, and he was out of there. Went to Washington and was in that mess with Daniel Snyder. Was tasked with trying to clean that up while Daniel Snyder was still the owner of the team, and obviously that didn't go very well either. But he did interview with the Raiders. He's a guy I saw at Allegiant Stadium at the end of the season, Week 18, when the Chargers were in town. Saw him there in the booth. I couldn't remember if I saw him, if he was working with ESPN, if he was working with Westwood One, if he was on the broadcast, or he was just doing some scouting. Can't remember exactly what booth I saw him in, but definitely saw him there at Allegiant Stadium, Week 18. So there's a lot of different other directions that can go. Like Mike McCarthy's still out there. I think that he's going to be in line for the Saints job. Cliff Kingsbury, there's no indication that he wants to leave D.C., be an offensive coordinator for Jaden Daniels. I know Vance Joseph interviewed with the Raiders already. He's a defensive coordinator there, the Denver Broncos. Like, there's other options that are out there, but I really kind of think that it's down to the guys that the Raiders have already interviewed, right? Ben Johnson, Bears. Mike Vrabel, Pats. Aaron Glenn, officially the Jets. So the positions are starting to fill up. So I do think that probably by the end of the week, we're going to find out what direction the Raiders choose to go with. And I do think it's either going to be a Pete Carroll or someone that's established and has already been there, done that. And that could be Ron Rivera. Again, he's not a guy that pushed the needle for me when I first saw that he was being interviewed. I thought, okay, maybe they're just picking his brain. And that very well could have been that. He's a well-respected coach around the league, but he's not a guy that pushes the needle for me. So it's not like if they announced they were hiring Ron Rivera, I'd go and do a backflip and be like, all right, the Raiders are going to get it done now, right? I'm much higher on Pete Carroll than Ron Rivera, but I must say, when I was talking to Sheena Quick on my radio show on Wednesday, she kind of intrigued piqued my interest a little bit on Ron Rivera, because again, a lot of the times that I talk to people about him, it's just kind of like, ho-hum, whatever. But I'll let you judge for yourself. Here's Sheena Quick. She covers the Panthers for 1340 Fox Sports. She's a Panthers beat writer. She does a really good job. Been knowing her for quite a while. She's talking about Ron Rivera and who he was as a Panthers head coach.
Pro and leader of men are like the two catchphrases during the hiring cycles, but he's definitely that. During his tenure here at Carolina, he was very, very integrated within the community, him and his family. His wife, Stephanie, would tell you, he's not the only Coach Rivera in their family. She's a coach as well. But definitely a player's coach, tough, fair, tenacious. He was a blast covering in Carolina, even when things started to kind of go a little sour. And I think that, the city of Las Vegas would really be lucky to have him.
For the most part, I don't hear a lot of people singing his praises, but that's a positive. That sounds like that him getting another head coaching job is not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. And, one could argue that, the ownership in Washington was tumultuous.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would disagree with me there. And when David Tepper got here, it proved to be tumultuous here as well. He wanted a new regime. He wanted his guys in, and that, led to the departure of Ron Rivera and a lot of Carolina Panthers staples in Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis, Cam Newton, Greg Olson, so it was kind of the end of an era when he came in. And, David Tepper told us it was because he wanted sustained excellence. The Panthers hadn't had and still have not had 2 consecutive winning seasons, but you kind of know how that story panned out. It's on the up and up now, but we know how it panned out during that time. But I don't have anything bad to say about Ron Rivera, and I doubt you would come across any of his former athletes that he's coached that would have something bad to say about Ron Rivera. Like, it's very easy to come up with our own notions of these guys if you're only judging them on Sundays. But as far as being in a building with this man, 4 or 5, sometimes 6 times a week, I have a very different viewpoint of him. And even also just as a woman in sports, he's always been very supportive of women in that space. Even when I didn't know that he was watching. I launched Quick Out the Blocks, which is my own media outlet. I launched that during his tenure. Again, I was fresh on the beat, had no idea he even knew anything about it, but he's tuned into the fine details. Even when he was here at Carolina on Fridays, he wouldn't be at the podium talking at us. Ron Rivera would be at a round table speaking with the local media.
Wow.
That's how relatable and approachable he is. And he's very open to, different ideas and different voices and perspectives. And I think that's something you always have to have in your back pocket as a coach in the NFL. You have to be open to outside perspectives and opinions and, expert ideas and things of that nature.
Sounds like he had a really good, healthy culture going on there in Carolina, regardless of how it shook out. That's not a bad thing as far as I'm concerned for the Raiders if they do, in fact, decide to go that direction.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and, like you said, he brought a lot of culture, and it's a culture that the Panthers have been trying to get back ever since he left. And, again, this is not a knock on Dave Canales because he's putting his own brand out there, and I think that, he was the correct hire for the job. He's turning things around here in Carolina, he and Dan Morgan. But, like you said, culture is a big thing, and with this team being in Las Vegas, I'm sorry, I just don't see where, that Al Davis culture has been able to kind of shift from Oakland to Las Vegas, and perhaps Ron and his family can help that.
As far as just the way that he builds a team and the way he gets them to go out there and compete game in and game out, day in, day out in practice, and again, building that competition, how does he go about doing that from your observations?
Listen, when I tell you, like, he's tough but fair but tough. Who else, Cam Newton's shoulder was darn near falling apart, and he was ready to go out there and play for Ron Rivera. So that should tell you a lot. And like I said, you're hard-pressed to find an athlete that he has coached that has anything negative to say about Ron Rivera. And I think that's, in the era of outspoken athletes these days, I think that's rare.
Yeah, it is.
I think that's very rare.
It is, because everyone has an outlet now. Everyone has a podcast. Everyone's got the show.
Everyone has an outlet.
Yep.
Everyone's talking. But, I think that when you are building a culture, you have to have a little bit of that old-school tenacity. The finesse isn't going to work when you're trying to establish a culture. When you're trying to maintain one, that's a different thing. But when you're going in and trying to put your stamp on it and making it your team, I think that you need that old-school toughness, and I think that that's what Ron Rivera would bring to Vegas.
So there was Sheena Quick talking about Ron Rivera, and again, I'm just trying to do a little deep dive and a little research. It's not like we don't know who Ron Rivera is. It's not like we didn't see him from a distance, from a player there in Chicago, a head coach with Carolina, a head coach with Washington. But I like to, talk to people that got boots on the ground, people that are there behind the scenes, so they can maybe give us a few little details that we didn't know. And she really hit it on the head when she said, a lot of people just judge guys off of Sundays, but they don't judge them off what's going on in the building 4, 5, 6 days. They're not judging them on what they're seeing on the practice field, how they're building a culture. And maybe that's what the Raiders are looking for. Again, he's not a guy that pushes the needle for me. He's not a guy that I'm pounding the table and say, oh, go hire Ron Rivera. But he is a candidate. He is the guy that they brought in and talked with. So there's many different ways that they can go. Again, they can go in a direction of a guy that they haven't talked to, like a Liam Cohen, like a Todd Monken, like other Mike McCarthy, right? Guys like that. They're all out there and available, and they can surprise us, right? My guy Ryan Hogue, former Raiders wide receiver, he joined my radio show on Wednesday, and he was telling me, he's like, Q, I think Pete Carroll is the fallback plan, but when has Tom Brady ever done anything as a fallback? or a backup. And I was like, yeah, that's a good point, right? So he thinks that there's a big hire on the way. I'm not as sure of that. I don't really feel like that there is. I think we kind of already know it by now, but he brings up a good point about Tom Brady, and now that, John Spytek is in the mix, maybe there very well could be a big one on the way. Of course, the big one was Ben Johnson. We all thought that was the way that they were going to go. Lance Newmark was going to be his GM, and it's funny, I mentioned Mark Davis not wanting to go with a brand new GM and a brand new head coach, but that's what they were willing to do for Ben Johnson. Like, they were willing to go so far to get Ben Johnson and really probably do something that was against their better judgment, and it might in the end work out better for the Raiders. It might end up working out like, hey, you know what, you kind of, I don't want to say dodge the bullet because that's too easy to say, but, more like maybe the second guy is actually better than the first guy that you were planning on bringing in. Think about this. Look where the Washington Commanders are. They're playing this weekend. They're one game away from the Super Bowl. Dan Quinn was the last guy that was hired. Dan Quinn was the second guy. Remember, they wanted to hire Ben Johnson. Their plane was on their way to go pick up Ben Johnson, and he turned them down. It was like, no, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to stay here in Detroit. They ended up going with Dan Quinn. That wasn't a hire that anyone was excited about. I know I kind of poo-pooed on it. I was like, yeah, last thing I remember from Dan Quinn, he got ran out of the building there in Dallas when Green Bay was beating him in the playoffs. And so I wasn't very high on that, but here they are. 1 year later, they've got their quarterback. They're one game away from the Super Bowl. So, I mean, just because it's not your first thought and the first person that you actually wanted for the head coach doesn't mean it's not going to be a really good head coach. So they've got few different directions they can go, but wanted to do a little bit of a, backstory and let you get a little bit more details on Ron Rivera. We had Robert Saleh on yesterday's show. We've done a deep dive on Pete Carroll. Obviously, we did one on Ben Johnson as well. If we find out about any other hires that could be potentially coming in, we'll continue to do our due diligence. But what's on your mind? Your calls and texts are next, 707-654-4693. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the show, and that is FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. And that FanDuel app, man, it's easy to navigate. They got a variety of bets that keep every game exciting. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. My suggestion, player prop bets. We always do a segment on Game Night on ESPN Radio, which is actually my regular show on ESPN Radio, where we do like hit it or miss it. And it's basically a bunch of player prop bets that, these you can win money with, right? Whether that's Jalen Hurts throwing for a certain amount of passing touchdowns, or Jaden Daniels running, or whatever the case, a defensive interception, a big play, whatever the case may be. There's so many different options, and we go through them every week. And it's a whole lot of fun. It's probably my favorite part of, just even looking at anything on the FanDuel app. And so you can do that as well. Go to FanDuel.com, join today, get started with $300 in bonus bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start off with a text from Slickback Raider. What's up, Q? Aiden O'Connell has to stop being the nice guy and start having the fuel and motivation to be the guy. Everyone in the media says the Raiders don't have a quarterback, but he should take that personally and show everyone that he is the guy. Doesn't it bother him that the whole entire media and organization is saying there's nobody to play that position that he plays? That's a text from Slickback Raider talking about Aiden O'Connell. And, I mean, he could take it personal, and I'm sure that he probably does. I'm sure he gets tired of hearing people say they need a quarterback, they need a quarterback. I think at the end of the day, and I'm not saying he's settling, but I think that reality is we all see who he is, right? He's a guy that can win you some games. He's a guy that could definitely start in the league, but he's more of a guy that's going to give you a start here, give you a start there. I honestly don't believe. And if I'm wrong, if he ends up getting a starting quarterback job with the Raiders or anyone else and ends up being the guy, right, the guy that you can just count on to be your franchise guys consistently every single Sunday, Thursday, Monday, whatever the case may be, I'll be the first to come back and admit that I was wrong. I just don't see a true franchise quarterback, a guy that can make all the throws, a guy that can get out of harm's way if he needs to, a guy that can be dynamic and go up against some of the better quarterbacks in the National Football League. I just don't see that. And clearly the organization doesn't either, as even the owner, Mark Davis, has said, maybe Tom Brady can help us find our next QB. That was the owner's words, not mine. That was the owner's words. So clearly I feel like there's a consensus around the team and around the league that Aiden O'Connell is a good quarterback, probably a really good backup quarterback, but not a consistent starter, at least not in my opinion. So thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. And you know what? If he got angry about that and took it personal and really, got after it to try to prove it to everybody, that'd be okay too. I ain't going to be mad at that. I've been the underdog my whole life, and I'm okay with that. Chip on the shoulder. The Raiders were made with chips on the shoulder, right? So that would not be a bad approach either if he decided to go and show everyone and prove to everyone he was the guy. But thanks again for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Raider X. He's calling to talk about losing out on Ben Johnson and what he thinks moving forward, and takes a look at the rest of the AFC West. Here he is, Raider X.
Yo, Q, this is Raider X. Just wanted to give a couple tidbits of my thoughts of, obviously everybody's kind of has a lot of opinions, good and bad, mostly bad right now, in regards to losing out on the sweepstakes for Ben Johnson. I want to give you my take because I liked him. I liked the excitement and the razzle-dazzle of some of the plays that, Detroit throws out there. But I really also like some of the, interviews and some of the insight. It makes me think, I always want to go with a proven commodity. Love to shoot for the, the stars and to see what is hopeful and the new blood going out there. But when you look at some of the success, around the NFL, especially the AFC West, you look at, proven commodities. You look at Sean Payton. You look at Harbaugh. You look at Andy Reid. And those are proven commodities. And Ben Johnson wasn't. You look at the Kingsbury, the Norv Turners. Those guys, great offensive minds, geniuses. But when they sit into that seat, don't want to talk about the, the McNugget, guy, but I want to talk about, Pete Carroll. The dude has always had success, either in college or in football, and has spent his time. And I want to go with somebody that knows what it looks like, knows how to build it, that's going to sit there and still have the vibe of the new generation, but also get us where we need to go, because obviously we're not there, and it doesn't show that we have the workings or the structure to achieve that. I don't want to go, be one and done. I want a consistent foundation and somebody that knows how to build the house, that's been there, done it, and been successful. I'm all in for Pete Carroll. There's some knocks on his age and so forth, but he doesn't need to go be running up and down the sidelines. We need his mind, we need his know-how, and we need his overall expertise. Let's go in, let's make this move and get him a DM that can sit there and pull the right strings and make the right moves to give us the goods and the cupboards. This is Raider X out.
X-Man, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. Pete Carroll, he's your guy. And look, I'm not against that either. I've suggested that a few times. And it's funny, man, the way things change. And this is why, I've had people call in and get angry about, someone changing their mind or thinking that it's not okay to change their mind. And I'm like, no, you could change your mind. I changed my mind. When Vinny Bonsignore, and he was the first one that ever floated Pete Carroll's name to me, first person ever. He mentioned him before Antonio Pierce even got fired. He's like, if AP were to be let go, what do you think about Pete Carroll? And I ain't going to lie. I was like, okay. I was very ho-hum about it. The first time I talked about Pete Carroll on the podcast, I was very, okay, ho-hum about it. But the more I thought about it, the more that I know what he's done and accomplished in his career, especially in the AFC West, I thought, okay, you know what? That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. No, he's not going to be an 8, 9, 10-year guy, but no one's guaranteed to be that guy. John McClain broke it down to me really well on my radio show on Tuesday. It's like, Q, when coaches get hired, they get hired to be a 4 or 5 year guy, right? If you get 4 or 5 years out of Pete Carroll, you've already won, right? If you get 4 or 5 years out of any coach, you won. And he said, and you're in Vegas covering the Raiders. If they get 4 or 5 years out of any coach, they've already won. And so, when I start thinking about that, plus what he brings to the table and the culture that he can provide and create, yeah, I think it is a good idea. We'll see what happens. We'll see if the Raiders decide that that's the direction that they want to go, if there's another veteran they want, or if they want to go with someone who's a new booty. I think that they have a bunch of different options, and John Spytek now is going to be heavily involved in making that decision. But thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from SoCal Raider 77. Q, I appreciate your tenacity and relentlessness when it comes to doing what you do, your profession and the coverage of this team. I can only imagine what the world would be like if more people in the world gave this amount of attention to what their craft was. Aside from that and all the attention on the next who's who in the building, which at the end of the day isn't that significant, I really just want to say that I appreciate your humility and love for your son, Kimani. Your thoughts, stories of your son are healing for you and so many of us out there that have experienced the loss of a loved one. Not sure what you think, but it would be helpful for many, maybe even you included, if you, with or without some of your family members, dedicated a standalone show to talk about Kimani and share some stories of his life and how the loss of your son continues to impact you and what you found to help cope, manage with the loss of a child or family member. You have this platform available to you, and I think something like this might just help others now and down the road. Keep doing what you do. That's SoCal Raider 77. Fantastic text, man. Fantastic text. Thank you so much. And yeah, normally on days like the 22nd, which was Wednesday, the day that Kimani passed, I normally do like a whole segment on him, but they got the coaching search, the GM search, and so I was like, man, I don't want to make it about me. I want to make it about the team because it is the Locked On Raiders podcast. I also do that on September 19th or the show close to September 19th, whatever show I can dedicate to him for his birthday. I always dedicate the game that comes up the weekend of his birthday. I call it Kimani's game, and lately, the Raiders have been letting me down on Kimani's game. I'll tell you that. They haven't done me any favors and haven't done him any favors. But, no, that's a good idea. It really is. And I can go on and on and on. I can do volumes on top of volumes about Kimani. Even though he only made it to 20 years old, there's so many different stories and so much I can talk about that young man and what he brings to the table and the laughs that he provided. He's a kid, so he provided some tears and some anger too. But I mean, that dude was he was a character. Let's just put it like that. He was definitely a character. He had my competitive nature, that's for sure. Matter of fact, that dude, let me tell you right now, even to get in trouble, if there was a race to get in trouble, he would do it. You know what I mean? Like, I bet you I can get in trouble first. Like, that's not the goal, dog. Like, you're not supposed to want to get in trouble first. Like, I bet you I can do it. And he was funny, man. He was a funny dude. So, yeah, I'll definitely think about that. It's a fantastic text, man. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And honestly, I tell the story because I know everyone's not able to tell their story. And so if I can help with someone else, if I can help someone else get past the, whatever they've got going on, or not past it, you never get past it, but if it helps ease the pain a little bit or makes it a little easier for someone else to tell their story, maybe not on a podcast platform or a radio platform, but just in public, sitting down, talking with their friends and stuff like that. That's I think a help. And honestly, it helps me as well. Cause honestly, even though it's been 5 years, I don't think that I've ever really sat down and just processed everything. I think it's still a process, and it's 5 years, and I probably should have already processed, but I don't think that I've gone that route yet. I've done a lot of work, a lot of work to really put my head down and focus in on that. But thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from YT33. He's calling to talk about the hiring of John Spytek, who's running the Raiders, and what they'll do about their quarterback situation. Here he goes, YT33.
Yo, Q. This is YTD33. Let's just get the real, man. Tom Brady is running this team, and I think it's amazing. Brady Nation, this is what we wanted. This is great. Look, John Spytek makes perfect sense. That's Tom Brady's guy. Mark Davis cannot run this team by himself. He doesn't know football. Tom Brady does. He just said, you know what, let me just go sign a champion and just bring him in. And all the decisions so far have been spot on. Let it go from Telesco to bringing John Spytek. Yes, that's perfect. That is perfect. Raider Nation, let me tell you, I'm going to say this right now, and I'm going to remind you when it happens. We are going to get Shedeur Sanders. That's the goal plan. That is the plan. And I don't think we're going to trade up for him because the Titans are not going to pass up on Travis Hunter. Let's just put it that way. We are going to get Shedeur Sanders. And I think our coach is going to be Pete Carroll. And I am perfectly okay with that. Let's go.
YT, first of all, I like the call. Really good stuff. YT33. That's really cool, man. All you need to do is like drop some bars now and have a hip hop song and a single, right? Just make it rhyme. It doesn't have to be a good one, right? As I sound like the old dude in the room, right? Hip hop these days isn't what it used to be, but it doesn't even have to be good. Just make the beat good, and you can say whatever you want to say. It'd be a smash, especially with the name YT33. But back to the call. Thanks so much for it. There's no doubt that Brady has a heavy influence on what's happening. Spytek is 100% Brady's guy. Mark Davis said at the owners' meetings that he wanted Brady to have a big say in what happens with the team. And I believe that Carroll is probably going to get the head coaching job, right? If it wasn't going to be Ben Johnson, I feel like the number 2 guy was always Pete Carroll, so he probably will get it. And to be honest, I wouldn't be shocked to see Shedeur end up in Vegas. Everyone keeps telling me that the Raiders missed out. They can't get their quarterback. They're not in position because they picked number 6. But I don't really buy that. Maybe I'm being foolish, but I really honestly do believe that Shedeur is going to end up in Vegas because he is Brady's guy, right? So Carroll, Shedeur, it wouldn't be a bad start for the Raiders getting this bad boy turned around. And I think that, Aiden O'Connell, as I talked about him earlier in this segment, he could probably get the start of the season until Shedeur is ready to take over. But I could definitely see that happening for sure. So thanks so much for that call. It's always good to hear from you. I appreciate you. Up next, I got a text from Reasonable Raider. Q, love what you do. Listen every morning. My name is Reasonable Raider from LA. Been a fan since 82. I have a lot to comment on, but I'll leave that for a voice message. I'm all in on Pete Carroll. Loved him since USC. He's exactly what we need as a head coach. I wanted to keep Antonio. I love Telesco. I wanted to keep both for at least another year to see the direction. But if we chose to move on, and we did, we better move on to experience. Ben Johnson, blah, blah, blah. He could be another McDaniels, and that'll set us back another 3 to 5 years. I'm banging on the table for Uncle Pete. Once he gets a job, I'll feel rested in our organization and the culture that's coming. Raider Nation for life, only one true nation. Raider for life, soldier of the shield, true since 82. Also, I'm still not a fan of Brady. Still hurt from the Tuck rule. I was happy for Eli giving him 2 L's. Brady hater. That's Reasonable Raider from LA. Thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. And look, I don't hold the Tuck rule against Tom Brady. He didn't make the call. He benefited from the call. The Patriots benefited from the call, obviously, but he wasn't the one that made the call. It was the officials, and we all know how that goes, right? So there's that. But what you're saying with Pete Carroll, I wholeheartedly agree with. And I got a contact for Pete Carroll. I'm going to try to reach out to him, try to get him on the show. I can't guarantee it's going to happen. Can't even guarantee the contact I have for him is the right contact, but I'm going to try to reach out to him and get him on the show before this process gets wrapped up, even, unless it happens sometime today. And again, things can happen quickly, but I'm trying to get him on the show just to kind of gauge his interest and his thoughts on being a head coach in 2025 at his age, what he could do for an organization that's been in a bad position like the Raiders have for so long, how that thing could work, and how he can get it done without a current quarterback in place. I want to do that. Not saying it's going to happen, so don't quote me. Don't tell everyone Q's going to have Pete Carroll on the show. No, I'm going to try to get Pete Carroll on the show. Nothing's guaranteed, but thank you so much for that text. I do appreciate you. We'll close up with a call from Jacob in Hanford. He's calling to talk about the passing of Kimani and what he thinks when I talk about him. Here he is, Jacob in Hanford.
What's up, Q? This is Jacob from Hanford, and I've been listening to you for about 3 years, 2 to 3 years. Every time you talk about your son, man, I just appreciate your openness. I appreciate your transparency, and COVID was a hard time for all of us, and it's listening to your story. A lot of it is relatable, but so much of it makes me feel for you. And I want to call you and let you know that I'm sure your son would be proud of you. Seeing where you've come, and you've featured on Raiders media now, and I'm sure that if he were still here and he can see what you're doing, he'd be very proud of you. Say that's my dad. And so I don't have anything else to say, but I just wanted to let you know that, Q. I hope you have a great day. Hope you and your family are doing well. God bless you. You take it easy. Go great.
Jacob, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you. And yeah, 2020 was wild for everyone, right? With the pandemic, something we hadn't seen before. It was bizarre. And the crazy thing is, that was the year that I actually realized how important this show is, how important my radio show is, not only to me, but a lot of folks. And honestly, I had no idea. And I've been doing radio for a long time, been doing this podcast for a long time. And I had no idea on how important it really was. But with Kimani's passing, I did my radio show like a few hours after finding out the news. But I realized how much I needed to be doing that. I needed to be in that space. I couldn't be in a space by myself, just sitting on the couch and wondering why me and feeling sorry for myself, because that's what I would have done, right? That's natural, right? I don't think anyone would have held that against me, but I had to be in that place to do the radio show. But moving forward, I had to have the podcast to be able to talk and express myself. And I missed about a week of the podcast following it. Matter of fact, after he passed away, I want to say it was like on a Thursday. I don't remember exactly, but it was either Wednesday or Thursday. I didn't do a podcast again until Super Bowl Sunday, and it obviously played on the Monday. I did it from my phone in a Airbnb in Miami, and I was sick as a dog. I think I had COVID before COVID was ever a thing. I had the chills. I was a mess. I was Theraflued up all week long. I don't even know how I survived on Radio Row, but I did it. And so I missed about a week of the podcast, but I realized how much I needed the podcast to be able to just talk and talk to my family members and talk to, Raider Nation and just kind of have that escape. Even if it's only for 30, 40 minutes, it's only supposed to be 28, but you know how I kind of go a little long sometimes. But I realized how much I needed that. And then with the pandemic, everything was, people weren't going to work. A lot of people they were doing stuff from home, and everyone that was working were called essential workers. I remember picking up the phone and talking to my dad, and I was like, well, I haven't missed any work, so apparently I'm an essential worker. And I honestly didn't have any idea. And he said, no, you are. You absolutely are. Like, nobody has any idea what the hell's going on with this pandemic. And you and your co-host and your show, at least it's there. Even though there's no sports going on. We literally did a 3-hour radio show, sports show, with no sports. Right? I mean, we were doing stupid stuff. Like T.O. did a sit-up challenge on the driveway of his house. We did that. We got T.O. on to talk about it. We were talking to high school coaches. We were talking to anyone who was anyone, right? Sports related, just to try to, just talk about something that wasn't whatever was going on in the world that none of us had any clue about. And so I realized how important that was, because anyone who could tune in, whether it was 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 hours, like the whole show was, or whatever the case may be, needed that escape as much as we needed that escape. So yeah, it was wild. It was a wild time. Some will say that things have never really bounced back the way that they were supposed to. So many people work from home now, including myself, right? I mean, it's just there's so many that do so much, and it's just like we found good things and good ways to get stuff done. Like I said, working from home, but it's still a lot of the communication it's never really been the same since then. And so yeah, it was a wild time, man, wild year. And so that's, part of the reason why I talk about my son consistently whenever I can, whenever I get the chance. Because, again, I think it's very important, not only for me, but for others out there as well. So, Jacob, thanks for the call. Thanks for the kind words. And that really goes out to everyone, man. Got a lot of texts on Wednesday. Got a lot of tweets and direct messages and everything. And that goes a long way. I do really, truly appreciate all that. And, of course, the family appreciates that as well. And we're going to keep doing what we do each and every day. And that's all that we can do. And, of course, always have Kimani in our minds. And we know that he's riding with us. He's rocking with us. And sometimes you just got to laugh. It's like, what are you laughing at? Oh, something Kimani did back in the day. And dude was silly. It's just that's all we can do. And that's all that we're going to do. So thank you so much again for the call. Appreciate that. And that's going to do it for today's show. Sorry, Ari, went a little long. Shocking. I do that. That's what we do at times, but that's how we get down. So we'll see what the next domino to drop, when the next domino is going to drop. Will the Raiders make some kind of move for their head coach today? Will it be by the end of the week? Well, we'll find out. But, of course, the one thing that you can count on is we'll be here to talk about it regardless each and every day here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So till tomorrow, Raider Nation, thanks so much for everything. But take care of yourself. Take care of your family. Love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.